the fourth way, what you've all been waiting for. Right. So this one, like I said, the first three ways are very similar to one another. And interestingly, the first three ways are very easy to understand. I know you might be thinking, gosh, none of this has been easy. Well, you're here, first of all. So give yourself a pat on the back. You're making an effort to understand this. And some people, they've never heard of the five ways. Some people you expect to have heard of the five ways or arguments for existence of God have actually, some Christians, like they've never even heard of these things. But you were here, you're learning about this. Kudos to you. But this one is actually really, really hard compared to the ones that we've already looked at. Why? Because, well, actually, this is a completely different metaphysics than everything we've already seen. This needs a little bit of explanation. The fourth way is metaphysics based on Plato, whereas 1, 2, 3, and 5 are all metaphysics based on Aristotle. So I kind of appreciate this actually, coming from Aquinas. Aquinas is much more Aristotelian than a follower of Plato, a Platonist. So he's much more Aristotelian, but I appreciate this because he's like, I've got something for everybody. In other words, so even though he may not fully agree with it, and I think he agrees with it to a certain extent because I'll say this as well, although he's very Aristotelian in his thinking, he also synthesizes the two in really spectacular and unique ways. So I want to show you this. You probably have seen this image before. And man, I didn't think to do this, but I've actually gotten a picture of this. This is in the Vatican museums, and you can see this is actually on a wall. It's a fresco, and this is the fresco called the Pins, and it's painted by Raphael. So pretty amazing. So if you're ever here, you're standing where Raphael standed and painted. You just can't move that thing. That's embedded into the wood. A fresco is like, it's not just painted, it's like painted into the stucco. And so like it's part of the wall. Interesting. So, okay. So now I only want to focus on these guys. And this comes from, of course, a larger PowerPoint on those categories, but right here, I've created this image here where the real things are, because this exemplifies what they're doing here. This is a whole explanation. Artists do things and make choices for a reason. Plato is pointing upward. Aristotle is pointing downward. How do I know it's Plato and Aristotle? Well, let's zoom in right here. We can see that obviously three clues. If you know your history, if you know your philosophy, you know that Aristotle was a student of Plato. So obviously Aristotle's the younger one. That's the first clue. We can also see that Plato is holding the Timaeus, something that Plato wrote, and Aristotle is holding the Ethica, or the Ethics, probably the Nicomachean Ethics, not the Eudemian Ethics. Yeah. So those are their famous works. And the third clue is the way they're pointing. So Plato's pointing upward, Aristotle's pointing downward. And in order to understand the fourth way, I'm not saying we'll understand it perfectly, we have to understand the difference between these two guys. So Aristotle, I'll tell you in a second. Most of us are pretty good Aristotelians because it's just a product of history. Like we're very good. Yeah. Plato, this should all sound very foreign to you because none of us are really Platonists these days. Although we all used to be Platonists until late antiquity, Middle Ages. Because St. Augustine was a Platonist. Bonaventure was a Platonist. Several of these late antiquity, early medieval philosophers and theologians were Platonists. But that's only because we didn't have Aristotle works. There's this whole, you can look up, there's a Wikipedia page about this idea that it was a historical accident. Just so happened that we lost all of Aristotle's original works. We had him obviously cited and quoted in other authors, but they were nowhere to be found. I don't know what happened, but it turns out they showed up, somewhere in the 1000s, 1100s. Well, where were they this whole time? Where were they being preserved? They were actually being preserved in Persia or the Islamic countries by Islamic philosophers. So, and in fact, in the 1000s, 1100s, there was a whole Islamic golden age. They were the world leaders in medicine, in mathematics, in astronomy, in philosophy. You name it, they just led the world on that, which is kind of hard to believe because we think modern day Islam, it seems to be very backwards, not world leaders or with technology or anything like that. But that's only because I think it was in the 60s that they had the revolution with the Ayatollah Khomeini. And so they went back to very conservative ways. But about a millennium ago, they were all very progressive and world leaders, and at least in progressive in the field of ideas. So, okay, let me talk about Plato. I'm going to use the example of this table here in front of me. You can't see it, but you probably got a table or something in your room with you. So if I'm Plato, this table that I'm touching right here is actually not real, right? Because what they're demonstrating here is where the really real things are. This table's not really real. The real table, the form of table, is up in the heavens somewhere, the Platonic realm of forms, or Platonic heaven. Nothing religious about Platonic heaven. Is just where these things reside because they're eternal. They have to live in a special place. They're not living, but you get it. They have to reside in some special place. So this table itself is just it's a poor representation of what real table looks like. Or if I see a dog, well, that's not the real form of dog. That is a poor representation of the form of dog. A good corollary or parallel with respect to understanding what he's doing here is think about like a portrait of a landscape, right? You see this beautiful landscape painting, and obviously it's very well done, you hope, but it doesn't quite match the real landscape, right? It's not a one-to-one. It's not a perfect copy. It's an imitation. It's a representation. It's not the real landscape. So that's what he says about all objects. This table is not table itself. I know it's weird to talk like that, again, because it sounds foreign to us. We're not Platonists. But this table is not table itself. It is a copy or imitation of what real table is. How do we know that? Well, that's not the question I wanted to ask. But think about it with respect to this. How do I know, first of all, if I see like a two-legged table? There are two-legged tables out there. You know, there are four-legged tables, there are three-legged tables, there are one-legged tables. There are no-legged tables. How do I know they're all tables? Because they, in some sense, represent the form of table. I'm able to access that in my mind and so on. Now, that sounds very strange. Aristotle, on the other hand, he thinks that this table actually is real. I mean, that sounds much more at home for us. We like that. This table, in fact, Aristotle, if we had not become Aristotelian, there's a really good argument to be made here that no science would have ever developed in our society. Because if I'm a Platonist, I can think about the reality of things without ever leaving my chair. I can be stuck in my ivory tower and never think about the world outside. I just have to think about the forms, the thoughts. Aristotle actually has to go out in the world and investigate the things. He has to observe. And that's what he does, in fact. He's spent some time in islands off the modern-day coast of Turkey and so on. So all that to say that we are very familiar with Aristotle, not so much from Plato. Plato is the responsibility here for the next argument. Let's look at the next argument. Okay. The fourth way, degrees of being. He says, premise 1, there is a gradation to be found in things. Some are better or worse than others. In other words, I look out into the world. He's starting with empirical knowledge again. I look out into the world, and this is what I see. I see that there's variation, there's gradation, there's a scale, there's in that idea that like some things are better or worse. Like I see things that are bigger or smaller. I see things more beautiful, less beautiful. I see things hotter or colder, right? So like hottest, so on and so on, right? There's this gradation or variance, right? The scale. Okay. Pretty unobjectionable. Even if we're good Aristotelians and we don't buy Platonist philosophy, like everybody can agree with this. Now, if you're looking to something to object for, this one is going to be the one to object for. Because second premise here, predications of degree require reference to the uttermost case. For example, a thing is said to be hotter according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest. That seems wrong because, I mean, just think about it. Like, do we really need, like, it was kind of humid today, kind of brisk and hot, and early in the day it was foggy. So imagine wherever you are. Imagine it's a hot day. do you need, if you're going to predicate like hotness of a day, do you need to reference the uttermost hottest day ever? It doesn't seem like it. Or if you say something is good, do you have to have in your mind the idea of what the ultimate good thing is so that you can like measure it against the ultimate good and see how good that your good really is? It doesn't seem like it, but that's because they're Aristotelian. Now, so let's keep going, because this one will also probably reject here. The maximum in any genus is said to be the cause of all in that genus, right? Because what is hot is caused by what is hottest, or that's not a very good example. I think it's an example he uses, but what is good down here is said to be caused by what is ultimately good. Now, let's take a look at what this looks like, because I'm a visual learner, and so I cannot think of this without visualizing this. So let me pull this up right here. Okay, so eventually he'll get to ultimate being, but we'll just start down here. And I can even have out to the side, to the left here, I could have put like hotness or something, because that's an example he uses first. He says hot things, hot things down here are going to have reference to the hottest thing up here. But same thing with all these attributes: truth, goodness, beauty. He says the good things are going to require reference to ultimate goodness, and they're going to get their existence from ultimate goodness. Okay? Now, let's see what the next premise says. He says here, therefore, there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection. This we call God. The cause of their being. This is itself an attribute, Aquinas thinks. Just like goodness, to be good, is an attribute. It's kind of quality or property of something. Being or existence itself is also a quality. It's not, goodness isn't shared by everything. I mean, I suppose, actually, I do think it is, but not everything is good in like a moral sense, let's suppose, but goodness is in everything. But being is in everything. What do I mean by being? I mean existence. Everything that exists has existence. That's all we're seeing here. So if we pull this back, he's saying this: for all these things, for all true things, they're going to also be existent. For all good things, they are also going to be existent. For all beautiful things, they're also going to be existent. So, if we follow even Plato's philosophy here, all of these things down here that have these attributes and get their truth or goodness or beauty from true, good, and beautiful, would ultimately, all these things would get their being from ultimate being. Now that sounds really similar to what we saw in the other 5 ways, right? The idea that there's an ultimate independent thing responsible for the existence of all other things. So it matches that in that respect. Now, if you wanted to know more about these things, I would look up what's called stuff on the transcendentals. And look here, they're right here. I don't know if you could see that I was wearing no shoes. I usually do wear at least socks, but it was rainy out earlier, so I stepped in a little leftover puddle and somehow I got my sock wet, so I had to take them off. But in any case, so here's a really couple really good books. This is by James F. Anderson, Introduction to Metaphysics of St. Thomas Aquinas. Really good stuff, and all of this in here, it's not actually by Anderson, it's by Thomas Aquinas, and it is all primary sources. And I have marked this thing up like wild, guys. I've just like, look at this. I've like destroyed this book. It's crazy. There's so much richness in all the things, but he's got a couple of chapters on the transcendentals. That is, actually, he's got a couple of chapters just on each transcendental. Same thing with our other author that I'll show this to you. Let's see, there it is. General introduction to transcendentals, and we've got, boom, right here. We've got transcendental 1. We've got transcendental, sorry, let me pull that out here. Chapter 6, the transcendental one. Chapter 7, the transcendental true. Chapter 8, the transcendental good, transcendental beauty in the next, so on and so forth. So if you want to do more reading on what this is, like I said earlier, Aquinas is very much an Aristotelian, but he also borrows these from Plato, and believe it or not, Aristotle does too. I don't want to mischaracterize Aristotle. He does believe in the transcendentals as well. And then this is also a good book here by W. Norris Clark. He's a Jesuit priest, very good scholar, one of the many contemporary Thomistic metaphysics have marked this thing up to death as well. So, similarly, I read these two together. They really balance each other out, and they provide much of the same material. And that wouldn't be all just primary sources. That's his take as well as a scholar. So I can give you reading assignments to continue on and follow this up more.